People were running to the store to spend it as soon as possible, because the game itself is watching you back, and it watches how many people are on the sidelines, and based on that the rule of the game might change. Even economists mention that gold is a hedge against hyperinflation, and I say it can be, but it's not actually a hedge against hyperinflation, it's a hedge against failing governments.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching Yankee Stacking. I have the privilege of interviewing Arpad from Star Path Academy. It's a new channel on YouTube you definitely need to check out. He knows his stuff when it comes to hyperinflation and the effects of devaluing currency from his home country of Romania. So stay tuned for my interview with Star Path Academy. Hi Arpad, thank you so much for joining Yankee Stacking.
Thank you very much for being here. I looked at your channel before, and I feel like I learned a lot, so it's a great honor to be here. Thank you very much.
You really do have an amazing story to tell. You started, I think, your channel, or your first video on your channel 5 years ago, but it really was the video how my family survived hyperinflation and what to expect when expecting high inflation that really just caught everyone's attention. I got emails from people saying, have you checked out Star Path Academy?
Thank you very much. Yes, it did attract a lot of attention, and I have my theories why, but I think it's just it was just how many of my other videos. It's just an honest conversation, a monologue to maybe, in a sense, how would I tell to my friends or other family members of what we went through. And that was kind of the whole point of the videos, and even future videos of telling the average man's perspective of what happens and how you can prepare for some of these calamities that could be occurring at any point in time.
You have an excellent way of describing real life in Eastern Europe. Your practical experience with what was really the destruction of your nation's wealth. You lived through it. You lived through a reset with your currency. What was it like in Romania when your currency hyperinflated?
Right, and I always start a little bit of context just so people get the idea of what happened or how it happened. And I'm going to cut it short this time, but it could be like complete videos about it. But hyperinflation started after the fall of communism in Romania. So just by that, you can know that usually when it's a economic situation changing from one type to another, and that might go reverse as well, it doesn't matter. When there's a lot of calamities, political calamities, and governments tend to do quick decisions, I should say, hyperinflation or a default or something other like that can happen. In our case, in '89, communism fell, and the execution of Ceausescu, our dictator, kind of sparked it off. But there was a sort of a half-year delay between when the flashpoint has happened, I should say, and to the point where inflation has started. It just became worse and worse. And the hyperinflation in Romania, I kind of mentioned it, it's a 4-0 inflation. That means the value of the Romanian lei went from something that would have costed around 1 lei, eventually costing 10,000 lei because of the 4 zeros in the 10,000 number. And you check out hyperinflation, it could mean that it needs to mean a certain percentage in the CPI, but of course that doesn't necessarily reflect the inflation on the street, what I'm talking about, especially coming from a poor family or a regular Romanian family or family from Romania. We didn't necessarily care about certain indicators on screens or what was in the newspaper. We just experienced life day by day as it was coming.
Right. I wanted to ask you about what it looked like practically speaking. Let's talk food. Let's talk bread.
Usually food price is one of the last things that inflates. And the way we experienced it was that the food bill, the quote unquote, monthly or weekly food bill was becoming more and more percentage wise of the pay that my parents took home because they were the working ones in factories and so on. So the food price was increasing and increasing, and that at some point when inflation kind of hits an inflection point, it starts a panic and a run for the stores, and that's what kind of happened in Romania as well. And at that point, well, people try to purchase everything and anything that they could find, but it was mainly the shelves go empty pretty fast, and at that point the store owners or even who would be producing these goods do not want to sell anymore because they would be on the receiving end of a losing deal. So in that sense, they might want to hold back their inventory for some later time, hoping that at later time that they would be able to sell it for more currency, which is of course true. So it becomes a self-feeding loop. And even the ones that would want to help people, they would not be able to do it because eventually the price that they would get for their produce or for their products, that would not be enough to recreate the same produce or product for the next batch or for the next food item and so on. So the ones that did not hold back would actually go out of business very fast, and there would shortages would happen. So we were actually accommodated to some shortages because during communism, especially during the austerity years, it was very hard to keep up with the demand that was demanded by the communist regime that was to kind of play into the austerity measures imposed on the country to pay off debt and so on, which we eventually did. So this was not completely new to us, and which was actually a good thing because almost everyone's pantry was stocked for at least a year.
Oh, okay. So you had you were prepared culturally.
Yes, that's correct.
Interesting. Yeah. You mentioned that it was happening quickly and that people really didn't want their currency as much as they wanted foodstuffs, things, actual supplies, right?
That's absolutely correct. At some point, currency becomes sort of just like monopoly money that you don't even pay attention what it is, what it buys. Immediately as you get your salary, you literally run, and people were running to the store to spend it as soon as possible because the week after, the month after would cost it would purchase less.
They wanted to get rid of this and get what was really of value to their lives. This is a Yugoslavian note. It's I think 1993 when they went through their hyperinflationary periods, 10 billion dinara. This one is a Zimbabwe note, $20 billion, they say. And case in point, when I talk about how fast this can happen, the date on this is 2008, just a year before 2007, a $1 note. Isn't that amazing? How quickly that can change. What was it like Romania-wise with your currency? How high did it get?
Right, so it went up to, I believe, 100 million Romanian lei. But it actually, even hyperinflation sort of fluctuates in rate. So it would go, the very first years, it was starting off slowly and people had some time to spend it. But at some point, the sort of national bank, the CEC was closed, and people who had deposits there would be stuck with the highest inflation during, I think, the second or third year, which was probably the highest. And then it sort of tapered down. Of course, it never went back, but the inflation rate slowed a little bit, and people thought that would be it, right? And then some people, and even us at some point, they start hoarding currency again because thinking that, well, the inflation rate is somewhat getting slower, and we might be talking about sophisticated stuff on our channels and studying macroeconomics, but the general people think that cash is safety, and to some degree, in some situation, of course it is, and that's what they have been taught for all their lives. So they would hoard more, and of course the next wave of inflation would take them out again.
You said something that just reminded me of another video of yours where you advised or advise people to learn to surf the waves of inflation and hyperinflation.
Right.
So can you explain what you mean by that?
So waves, I meant by the increasing of the inflation rate or slowing down of the inflation rate. It always kind of goes up. There's almost never a return back. But however, the speed of it changes, and so there's a wave within one type of asset. May that be houses, may that be natural gas, what we produced in Romania, may it be anything else. There's a wave how it inflates first and then it slows down, and there might be another wave and might be another wave. But also I meant that the difference, the times difference between how assets increase, and usually it starts with raw materials and then stuff made from raw materials, then usually it's houses. Stocks were probably are prior to houses. However, at some point they turned for us at least. And then after housing, eventually food, and after food, gold and some other stuff that people got interested in. So there's
and then maybe wages is one of the last things that
yes,
seems
correct.
to go up, right?
So usually right after food, wages have to increase, and that's also a natural wage increase, and also quote unquote government helped, and helped is in quotes. Increase in wages, may that be subsidies, may that be coupons or something else that government tries to do, because whether the situation is a hyperinflation or some other calamities, usually governments, in my experience, try to keep the social structure, the power structure. So they don't necessarily care too much about you paying your taxes in these times. That was our experience. Of course, you know, new scenarios might be completely different. I'm just telling my experience, of course. Or even sometimes energy cost, they would try to keep low, which of course meant that there were rolling blackouts and such things. But the waves is sort of a two-part concept. One is that individual assets increase in waves, and then increase in one asset might pull a different type of asset afterwards, just like how raw materials pulls houses, right? So houses might pull rent, and rent might pull actual increase in wages, because people will have to eventually live on something or somewhere, right?
Another video was about how to get rich during hyperinflation. And I've talked with several people that say, Yankee, hyperinflation, no problem. Just take out the longest term fixed rate loan you can get, go into debt, and just have a party, because it's all going to, you know, blow up at some point and you'll be scot-free.
If a lot of people are doing that, then the actual rule of the game might change. And I did mention in one of my videos that one of the ways how people got rich, or some people got rich, I should say, more politically connected people definitely, was actually staying on the sideline in a type of assets that they might have bought with debt. And while their debt was being inflated away, their assets were increasing in price. However, it's an active game, so it's not just a static game that you position yourself and you can wait it out, because the game itself is watching you back, and it watches how many people are on the sidelines, and based on that, the rule of the game might change, right? It's sort of a teeter-totter, where if too many people are on one side, then it will just fall over on that side, and then I should say the fleecing has to take place almost. That's just one of the things that you mentioned. Political shifts happen, like communism and other political ideologies can come to a country after some of these major calamities, and they might change the economical situation completely. So that's a sort of a major thing that could happen. But also think about taking out the debt. How will you service that debt? Because you might think that you can buy an apartment house, you know, downtown New York, but what happens in hyperinflation? It could be that a lot of people are moving out of New York. how will you service that debt now on a property that has no income? So there's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. But if you are very, I should say, proactive, there could be ways how this could play into your hand, because usually this targets the majority of the people, and especially middle and upper middle class, that gets flattened out. But it's not something that you want to see to your fellow men, because these calamities come with a lot of pain. And through my life, I've seen a lot of bad things happen to many poor families that sometimes it's hard to talk about. During communism, the ownership of gold was outlawed, and even coinage, silver or something like that would have not been looked at by the secret police kindly. However, you would be able to own silver jewelry, but that was really to some limited amounts that you could bring back into the country after a visit from visiting the USSR or Bulgaria or some other countries, because that would of course be limited. So for us, silver or gold was never used for barter. I can see how silver especially could have been used, but it was just not the type of investment grade silver that we had. For gold, I actually shared a more personal story about my own grandfather, comparing it to a butcher from the same town that I lived in. From that example I can draw, and from similar examples that I haven't shared, for gold was definitely a multi-generational tool, not just necessarily a tool that you go in and out. And these cycles are, for gold especially, are very huge. And you could have lived, think about communism, you might have been born under communism and lived under communism, and some people of course died under communism, and they never saw anything else but communism. For them, gold was completely outlawed, right, in their whole of their lifetime. So that means you might have to be able to hold through these periods as well, not just hyperinflation, in order for you to make for gold to make sense. What I've seen in the United States, that trust between people is eroding, and it's eroding at a faster and faster pace. That we had actually in Romania, especially in small towns. You could know that, you know, your second cousin husband or something, you will be able to barter with him, or someone who he recommended, you will be able to barter with him, because there's a underlying trust that happens, right? And because even if you use silver or something else, you might not know what is the exact price of chicken right now. The American situation is very unique in the world, because you have enjoyed a lot of freedoms, and the history of the American United States is unique in that way, right? And unfortunately, of course, you're not appreciating, or many people are not appreciating the freedoms that you have right now. But this could be a time to use to kind of work out this situation, how a future barter society would look like. So whether you use silver or something else, that would definitely help, being able to divide and subdivide whatever you're bartering in. Usually barter happens with a longer period with someone who you trust, that I will be providing chicken for you these next 2 months, and you will be providing potatoes, and we can work out some deal.
I think though, if we're honest with ourselves as Americans, and things get really bad, we're not prepared to handle a single chicken for pretty much anything here. And I think it's going to devolve quickly to the point in which we're going to look to our government to hand out the food. And I'm worried that at that point, it's going to devolve a lot worse into social anarchy.
Well, I can only speculate what would happen in the United States, but I think you kind of touched on the very sensitive topic that I think is true. So a lot of YouTubers and even economists mention that gold is a hedge against hyperinflation. And I say it can be, but it's not actually a hedge against hyperinflation. It's a hedge against failing governments. Gold is outside of governments, and anything that's tangible is really outside of governments if you can, manage it well, right? Whereas fiat currencies are part of government, and it could be a very nice and good part of government. But when government fails, everything that it provides, which could be very useful services, of course, fails as well. And then that point, you go back to what's very basic, what's been there before even your government has started, maybe even your country, maybe even the kingdom or something like else. So then you fall back to something that is very value dense, which is gold, because you can fill 2 suitcases of gold and go to somewhere else, and no matter where you go in the world, eventually it will have some value there as well. So gold actually, because of this, in my opinion, of course, tends to be one of the very last things that go up and shoot up right before a hyperinflation or a default or something like that would happen to a country, because at that point the trust in government has failed, and that is the point where it shoots up a lot. Before that, while services are going and the government is doing its duties to the best of its ability, of course, many other things sort of kind of can act as a substitute for gold, which could be stocks, could be real estate, and so on, as long as the basic services of a society are met. But as soon as you are losing faith, it of course doesn't even have to hyperinflate. It's just enough people lose faith in it, that's enough for it to shoot up. Just because you have the reserve currency, that means that you are on the highest shelf in the room. But when things start falling, that means relatively you might fall relatively the most from the highest point in the room.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
So that means if in case the United States dollar would lose the reserve currency status, which is, if you look at history and if you study history, it's really just a lot of international organizations or national organizations coming together and signing some papers and agreeing on a future that they think that will have a nicer outlook or something like that. So that could, in my opinion, of course, it needs to some other actions have to happen first, but it's really just something that can happen really fast. And at that point, everything would be falling, and you would be falling from the highest point, because a United States dollar is safety to a lot of countries that think it is safety for now. But once that might change, things might change much faster than it did for us, because we were just a local economy
with global impact, not just
Correct.
Within the United States. So this is a big deal. And again, I have to ask you, just from your perspective, you've got firsthand knowledge in this. I mean, even in that smaller country, and maybe there are a lot of differences, but still, how would you suggest Americans prep?
Right. So this would mean, of course, prepping in many different categories of your life. Food and shelter, to security, to many other things. And I think the most basic you need to cover first. So I would think that what helped us in our scenario would help anyone in any scenario, which is basically having a farm or a homestead where you can produce your own food and produce your own whatever you need that is essential for life. So I would think that would be the very first thing to do. And of course, I know not a lot of people have options for this. In that case, I would say food and water filtration and the security would be the very first thing to do. But even before this and any of this, I would say connections, connecting to relatives, connecting to other people you trust, to the community that you are part of, and making sure that you serve your community right now before bad things happen, to build that trust. When major things might happen, they know that they can come to Yankee because he's one of the persons that they know that he has always helped them, or something like that. So the best currency is actually trust in your fellow man, I would say. I would start learning how to can, learning how to bake bread, learning how to store grain in limited storage spaces, learning how to prepare your own food. So I was amazed that some Americans don't even know how to do that. But
That's sad, but true.
Going beyond that, storing meat, smoking meat, what would happen in a case where your electricity would go away? So I think the pandemic that was happening in these last couple of years or months actually was a really good test if you think about it. And maybe that is something you should do as well. See how you would fare for a week without electricity. What would happen to your food? And then you can think about that scenario. How would it happen if you don't go to the store for the next 2 months? So you can do your own test, talk with your family about it. Of course, you don't want your wife to get too angry about you throwing away the family car's key, but see how you fare without a car for a couple of months or something like that. Of course, I'm exaggerating, but you can definitely test of 1 week or 2 weeks. And then you will be able to tell how you need to prepare, because everyone's necessities are different. I come from a very poor country, or used to be a very poor country, from a poor family. My standards of living are very different than yours, Yankee.
Your words are full of wisdom, Arpad. Thank you so much for sharing this. I don't think we're done. I think we've got to do this again in the future. We just scratched the surface. There's so much more that I'd love to talk to you about, but I hope people will check your channel out, Star Path Academy. I'll put the link in the description. Subscribe to him. You won't be sorry. And Arpad, thank you again so much for sharing.
Thank you very much.